Well, welcome back, Dr. Stephanie Gray. I'm so excited to chat with you. We get so many questions about hormones, and I was like, Stephanie, we got to get you back on here, talk about hormones, help these ladies, help answer their questions. And we're also going to talk about longevity as well. So, since it has been a long time, like years, because I've been doing
Probably
this
like
podcast,
five. I mean, my book came out
it's
in 2017, so it had to be around that time. So life is
yeah,
flying by. Yeah.
it was. I know. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe had been that long. And I got the honor of being on your podcast. I don't think it's out yet, but
Yes.
it'll be out one of these days. As
Thank you for
well,
coming on. Yeah.
hopefully. Yeah. So, Stephanie, will you just share with everyone a little bit about you? And like I said, I will always link up previous interview that we've done.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll get started talking about questions about hormones that my ladies have been asking.
I'm also a native Iowan. I guess I was born in Nebraska, but I live in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, so not too far from you. How I got interested in functional medicine. So I have a functional medicine clinic in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Well, technically Hiawatha, but same thing. So a couple different pieces of my story, which I think I do elaborate on the earlier show years ago, but essentially I feel like I was really blessed to be born and raised in the Midwest in a very healthy family. We grew up having home cooked meals. We always went to the chiropractor. We were always engaged in physical activity. And so I felt like, I have this health thing down, like little did I know though that stress in my life I didn't have down. And so one day sitting at my desk, I had a great day seeing patients. I mean, I thought I was, yeah, rocking health, but I really wasn't. So sitting at my desk one day after seeing patients in the morning, my heart took off to the races. So I had this medical tachycardia is what the term is called when you have very fast heart rate. And I remember that day because I'm sitting at my desk. This was at our former office, and I tried to buzz my husband, who's our office manager, on our phone, and I was so disoriented. I thought I was having like a stroke. I didn't know what's happening. Didn't even know which button to push to get him. And I look at my doorway, and it felt like it was a football field away. Like, I need help. How do I get help? So I made it down my hallway. My nurse found me, gray as could be. Obviously, I went to the emergency room that day. And a long story short, I was sent to Mayo Clinic. I thought locally no one would do an ablation on me for the tachycardia because of the location of what was happening in my heart. So I was sent to Mayo Clinic, and I was essentially told that I could take a medication to control my heart rate. And while there are time and places for that, in that moment, I knew that wasn't the solution, right? That taking the medication wasn't going to tell me why that was happening to me. And so concurrently, and you know this now that I have a son, right? But at the same time in my life, I also was struggling with infertility. And that's really, really hard as a practitioner who optimizes hormones. Like, that's what we're going to talk about today, right? Optimizing hormones. I felt like such a hypocrite and a failure. It was really dark times in my life, and that I had this thriving practice. I was helping patients get pregnant, but yet my womb was empty, right? And I'm aging, right? I'm at this point, I was like, I don't know, 34 years old or whatnot. I thought I need to start popping these babies out. I'm never going to be able to have them. Come to find out, I had stage 4 endometriosis and needed progesterone, which we can talk about a little bit today. And I ended up didn't have full blown celiac, but my celiac blood markers were positive. So I had to go gluten free. I've been gluten free ever since. Had SIBO, I had fructose intolerance. I was a hot mess. Right? I thought I was healthy, but yet I had a lot of things that I needed to work on. And so in that moment, that's really when I kind of wrote the Longevity Blueprint book to walk patients through functional medicine principles that I had to use to get my health back, to rebuild my health. And then that's the framework that I use with my patients. And hormones are a big part of that. They are just a big needle mover, a big game changer. They get patients feeling better, so they're more compliant with recommendations. So hormones were a game changer for me, and as were a lot of other functional medicine practices and lifestyle changes that I had to implement. So I went through some hard times, but my health has taken a turn for the better, and I got to empathize with my patients through all that, right? When I see that, oh my gosh, I have to go gluten-free too, like I have to do these things too. Yes, I do. Right. So it actually really improved my work as a clinician. So I'm thankful for my journey and where it's brought me.
Yeah, isn't it amazing how it's the hard stuff in our life is what really propels us forward? Because I feel the same way. So let's start talking about hormones. Like you were bringing up some things that I was like, oh, maybe we should talk about some of those, but I'll stick to my Stick to
We'll
my
go
list of
wherever you
things.
want. I don't care. Yeah.
We may have to have a whole other episode on more hormone stuff. I feel like hormones is such a very loaded conversation. We literally could spend hours and hours, days and days talking about hormones.
Yes.
So, okay, I feel like we want to start with this question because I had one of our listeners ask this question, and I think it's so important too. Is like, what are the best ways to manage hormonal emotions in a healthy way when you feel, again, this is a loaded question, but we'll start with little tips and then we
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
go a little bit deeper because like what are causing those hormonal imbalances? We're going to get there. But when it
Yeah.
comes
Yeah.
to those emotions that we can feel, whether it's on a regular basis or leading up to our cycle, or even a post-menopausal woman who's like, I don't have hormones, and what are
Yeah.
the emotions that can come out of some of that? So
I feel like I could talk about this for half an hour. So I want to unpack a lot of what you're asking. So maybe should we start with just defining what hormones are? Like back it up a little bit.
sure, let's do it.
So hormones are chemical messengers that send important signals. So think adrenal hormones like cortisol, thyroid hormones like free T4, free T3, sex hormones like progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone, which probably more apply to the emotions that you're asking about. They're responsible for making us feel good, protecting our bones and brain and heart, which I know we'll get into, and even our relationships. So when I think of managing them, I almost feel like a which I know we need to manage our emotions, but I almost feel like a better word may be optimizing, right? Or balancing our hormones. So I think in essence, that person may be asking like kind of how to do that. But I think just having the awareness of what they do is important, and recognizing that as a male, your testosterone is like the same the whole month. As a female, we have fluctuations and we are designed and created that way, right? So we're going to be more tired when we're losing blood and we're anemic the time, right? So we shouldn't go run a marathon those days. And then the days that our libido is high and we feel amazing, like those are our days and weeks to just go achieve and do things we need to. And then as progesterone tanks towards the end of the cycle prior to bleeding, we need to recognize we may be a little more moody and emotional. And that's honestly, we need to accept part of that's the natural hormone rhythm. And so I think just recognizing and having the awareness that as females, we're going to have more fluctuations, and that's okay. Especially if you're in your 40s or 50s, like you probably know by now that hormones do fluctuate a lot. But you don't have to be miserable. I think there are a lot of things we can do to help optimize those hormones. So I don't know if I'm going where you want me to go with this. So you'd cut me off, but I think, there are
You're good. I love
okay.
I love all of this. I think like that awareness is huge. I want to interject with something here too, and to add on to everything you're saying is because I feel like women are so hard on themselves, and you're like,
Yes.
why? Like you're like, I feel like a crazy person, or what's wrong
Yes.
with me, or whatever it is. And it's like, no, actually, like first off, ladies, if those of you that are cycling, track your cycle. Like I cannot stress it enough. I teach,
Yes.
and I'm like, teach those of you that have, daughters as they start to cycle, teach them, because when it's knowledge is power. That's what I always say, right? When you can just understand so much more about what is going on with your body and you're like, man, I just feel really tired today, or I feel really cranky, or I feel really like I have no patience with the world. Okay, open that app and just see where you're at. And I swear to you, it's helped me so much when I'm like, oh, it's that like kind of reassurance that like, oh, I'm not a crazy person. My cycle's literally going to start tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, thank you for that reminder on my
Mhm.
app on my phone. And
Yes.
it
Yes.
literally makes you feel better. At least that's been my experience. And that's how I feel like it's helped clients and friends and stuff too. It's like, oh, I'm not crazy. It's just part of my cycle. And when you realize that, then you're like, okay, it's just part of this normal thing. And then if there are, actual
Mhm.
more hormonal imbalances, because there's a part of this that's normal, right, Stephanie? And then there's the,
There are normal
okay,
fluctuations. When they're severe and impacting your life, we need to do something about it. Yeah.
that's what we want to get in and talk about is these hormone imbalances. So,
And I think I'm going off on another tangent here, but I've really found the Mira. I don't know if you've heard of the little hormone tracker device
mm,
now, that from home, patients can actually, through urine, they can test their estrogen and progesterone levels. So I feel like
oh,
that's been very helpful for my patients because they can send me those results. So they can say, okay, I felt really good or really bad on this day. Then we look and see where their hormones are that day. And then again, they get that recognition like, okay, here's what's happening. Here's how my hormones are fluctuating. And they know, month to month, cycle to cycle, okay, this too will pass. These 2 days, I don't feel awesome. But you know what? By day 3, whatever day that is, right?
Yeah.
They're going to feel better. And so I think we just have technology is advancing to the point where one day there'll probably be, just like there's a continuous glucose monitor, there'll be some sort of continuous hormone tracker or something.
So, oh, I have not heard of that. What's it called?
The Mira, Mira. It's great for
Okay.
fertility too, for patients who are trying to track ovulation and whatnot. It's a couple $100, but it's, I feel like, a very affordable in-home
But
device.
it sounds to me kind of like what we're doing with the Dutch test a little bit. I mean, obviously it's not measuring cortisol, what that does, but
And
is it
not
kind of giving,
metabolites. We're not getting estrogen metabolites. It is urine, so we're not getting that
yeah,
piece. But yes, we're getting. So if you're doing like a cycle map with a Dutch test, it's similar
that's
because
what
you
it
can
is.
get
Okay.
yes, yep.
That's really neat. Okay. Very
Yeah.
fascinating. I will be looking into that. So for
The other
clients and stuff, I think it's amazing.
the other part of, I guess, my answer to that question when someone's kind of asking, how do I manage I guess I need to get back more to the emotions. But again, back to when I first heard the question, I was thinking, how do we manage or maybe like optimize hormones? There are 3 tips. Like before we get to hormone replacement therapy, there are 3 things that I talk to my patients a lot about. And so I can kind of go into those easy 3 things. So one is to reduce stress. So if you know you're already feeling really lousy, again, that's not a day you're going to go run a marathon, or take on 3 podcasts or whatever. Like stress is our body's biggest hormone hijacker. I say that all the time. And there is such thing as good stress, right? Eustress. But I think patients know what I mean. Like you need to set healthy boundaries and not overdo it. And times that your body's really working hard, right? Certain weeks of
Yeah.
the month of the cycle. And I always tell patients there's no pill, potion, or powder that's going to replace lifestyle changes. So only you have the power to do that, to change your lifestyle. So that's where meditation and yoga, and this is where you come in, Pilates, resting and allowing time for headspace. So reducing stress is huge. So that's kind of number 1. 2 is working to fix nutritional deficiencies, at which I'll get into in a moment, but I want to mention number 3, which is working to detoxify the body too. So for instance, like when I'm having menstrual cramps, like eating pizza or dairy, something that's not good for me is going to worsen those symptoms. So we need to be, so I'm seeing that as like a toxin, inflammatory toxin, right? So we need to be just keen on how we're eating and really work to detox the body as well. So let me go back to 2 though, which is fix nutritional deficiencies. So that's important also to number 3 because your detox pathways require nutrients. So you don't want to be nutritionally deficient. And this is a super extreme example. I don't see this all the time, but one example I mentioned in my book, I remember this woman who came in to see me with severe hot flashes, and all I did was put her on a multivitamin and her hot flashes went away. And she thought I cured her. And I was like, no, you were eating McDonald's 3 times a day. Like you just needed a little nutrition to give you the cofactors to make hormones, right? And she felt better. And that's an extreme example, but in general, a lot of your listeners probably are exercising. They may be drinking caffeine. They may have stress, high-paced lifestyles, right? All of that robs you of nutrients. So we need to make sure we're repleting magnesium and B vitamins and essential fatty acids and amino acids, all those things, which again are cofactors required to make thyroid, adrenal, and sex hormones. So we really want to fix nutritional deficiencies. And then detoxing the body is an ongoing journey, right? Toxins are like everywhere in the world.
Yes.
But how they impact our hormones is they can bind to hormone receptors. Many of them look like our hormones. So we call them endocrine disrupting chemicals that we really need to work to get them out of our life. There are 3 specific that I talk about here. Do you want me to keep going on
Yeah, this
toxins?
is great. Yes, please do. I love the toxicity conversation. It's so important.
Which, I mean, there are entire podcasts like seasons donated to toxins, right? So like living in Iowa, we're exposed to herbicides and pesticides, chlorine in the water, heavy metals if we have them in our mouth, right? Mold toxins, right? But the 3 easier things to deal with that I like to talk about with my patients are plastics, fragrances, and back to dairy. So yes, plastic is toxic and not meant to be ingested. And like, think of how many times on a daily basis you come into contact with plastic. Like, did you put ketchup on your food? Like, what did you have? Peanut butter, cough spray, baby formula. All of these things come from plastic. And we don't always realize that the plastic's leaching into those foods that we're then consuming. So plastics contain BPA, which is an endocrine disrupting chemical, which can impact our reproductive organs, right? Specifically the breasts in females and the prostate in males. Aluminum is also not safe. Like I love getting canned salmon. I just put it on my salad, whatnot, but I don't do it too often because again, the aluminum can leach into the salmon that I'm eating. So glass is the best choice. Um, and then, so I'm saying no plastics and then fragrances, which you probably have talked a lot about this on your podcast, but examples of fragrances really come from our personal care products. So you got to read the label. And if it says parabens, phthalates, fragrance, I mean, just avoid it entirely. And then dairy, I love dairy. Dairy has always been my favorite food. It's not good for our hormones. So dairy comes from a cow, right? Who's been likely injected with growth hormone, increasing estrogen, who has been likely eating GMO grains that are also loaded with pesticides and herbicides that might even be moldy. So then that milk is put in a plastic laden container. So if you think of it, by the time dairy gets to your mouth, that dairy has had potentially layers and layers of endocrine disrupting chemicals inside of it. So I know with
So
my endometriosis,
question
yeah,
about the dairy.
yeah,
What are
yeah,
your thoughts if it's organic, if it's
better,
raw dairy even?
obviously better. Yes. I think the majority of dairy, though, like when you go out to restaurants and whatnot, is not high quality. It's just crap. But yes, quality matters, organic matters. All of that is great. So I'm okay with, I think we shouldn't overdo the dairy. And I think it depends on the person. Like if you have a dairy sensitivity on your food sensitivity test, it doesn't matter if it's organic or not, like dairy is probably not good for you, right?
Right,
And
exactly.
and with my son, I had gone gluten free, but it wasn't until I was a year dairy free that I conceived. So I know for me personally, obviously I'm fixated on dairy because for me it was a big needle mover getting off of it. It may not be, the top food that everyone needs to go off of. It's something that we should just be aware of. And if you choose to consume it, choose a higher quality option, of course.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely with dairy. Oh, I was going to say something with the toxicity, just to show with everyone the magnitude of like what mold can do to the body.
mhm.
Because again, I feel like you recognize it, but so many people still don't, the medical world,
Yep.
all that. But I was doing Dutch tests around this time and I literally had menopausal levels of hormones.
Did you
And
feel like
it
that
was,
also? Like, were you feeling
I
symptomatic?
Oh, I had every symptom.
Yeah.
Like, but on my labs, the only thing that showed up was that I was low iron. And you're like, what? You know what I mean? I'm like, I was never anemic when I was pregnant with my three kids. So I
Yeah.
knew from my body. This is why I always tell people, like, you need to know your body. You need to learn more about
Yes.
you because then when something shows up that you're like, this is not my normal
Right.
thing. I've never had low iron in my life. And then that's all they could find on the medical side. And but obviously because I'm open to functional health, have always been, I knew,
Thankfully,
and it,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it shocked the heck out of me. I was like, oh my goodness, like, not that I wasn't motivated to not turn like detox and turn my health around because I was barely functioning at one point, but to literally see that on a lab that you're like, I have menopausal level of hormones. I'm like, I'm in my
What
early
the
30s.
heck is going on? Yeah.
This is not okay. You know what I mean? So it's just
Can I
crazy. Yeah, go for it.
Well, I was just going to say, can I expand on that? So I've
Yeah.
seen both. So I've seen with mold toxicity or any toxicities, I've seen hormone levels tank. And I've also seen there are certain mold toxins, which I cannot pronounce any of them, but one is called zearalenone, which is very estrogenic, which can cause high estrogen. So I have seen both happen with mold toxicity. I've seen patients come in looking like they have premature ovarian failure, right, with infertility, who we detox them from mold and they get pregnant. And that is, sorry, but freaking amazing, right?
Yeah.
Because from a conventional medicine standpoint, that individual would have been put on tons of drugs and they may have helped, right? But we got to the root cause of the problem and allowed the body to function as it was designed to function. So that's such a strength in functional medicine, is looking for the triggers, the causes, like what's causing that dysfunction in the body. Let's remove it. Let's do whatever we need to do to allow the body, again, to function as it was designed. So I'm glad you figured
Yeah.
that out.
Yes, me too. Me too. It's amazing. And just a little side note on all this, like just as someone who had a lot of ovarian cysts growing up, starting really young, and having done all the detoxification. And the one
Yeah.
thing too, I just want to remind everybody listening, and I talk about detoxification periodically because I'm so passionate about it, because I've seen it, what it does to myself or what it's done to my health, what it does to the clients I work with too. But like for me now, I'm like, gosh, if I would have had even a little bit of this information when I was
I
younger, I
know.
would have
I know.
prevented so much stuff with my cycles. You know what I
I
mean?
think about that all the
And
time. Yeah, and for the listeners, though, like if you're hearing this for the first time, don't be discouraged because obviously we've both been there too. Like with my endometriosis, man, I used to use Bath and Body Works. I went to Victoria's Secret and got the saccharin fragrance laced lip gloss. I mean, I was literally inducing my endometriosis. I got chemical hair straighteners because I have natural curly hair. Like all these things that I did, I wish, and it's not my parents' fault, they didn't know either, but like I wish for being as healthy of a family as we were, we didn't know about endocrine disrupting chemicals back then. And I wish I would have known because I feel like I could have prevented the endometriosis, but we can't go backwards. We can only go forward. So let knowledge be power. Let that empower you to make better changes, moving forward and share the wealth with those in need. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Okay, let's move on and talk about. Is there anything else that I guess I should ask you this, Stephanie, that you really want to add about balancing hormones? In particular, I would say like, well, I mean, this applies to all women because even menopause, your food you
Yeah.
eat, toxicity will affect that for sure. Otherwise, do you want to
Well,
talk
should we
about
talk about like what hormones do even? Like, so what each hormone's responsible for? I
Sure,
mean,
let's do that. And then I want to talk about hormone replacement therapy because that
yes,
comes up a lot
that's
and
my jam. I'm very,
it's
yeah.
it's very confusing.
So if you're listening and you're on the younger spectrum, usually the first hormone to tank is progesterone. And that's what happened in my situation, right? So I actually took progesterone through 36 weeks of pregnancy because I was just so low, which I had self-induced with like stress, being an entrepreneur and, whatever, which I'm still working on, right? Because that minimizing stress is a journey. But symptoms of low progesterone can be heavy cycles, irregular bleeding, severe PMS, back to those emotions, right? Poor sleep, anxiety, whatnot. So many times patients and infertility or inability to carry, right, to term. So many patients start with low progesterone. That's the first hormone that kind of tanks. I see low testosterone and low thyroid a lot also, and many of those symptoms kind of overlap. But with low thyroid, patients can feel fatigued, have a sluggish metabolism, poor memory. Everything slows down, even their bowels and their hair growth, constipation, hair and nail thinning, cold intolerance, right? With low testosterone, low mood, motivation, drive, libido, energy, poor muscle mass, poor bone density, although that can happen with any low hormones. And I've seen women in their 20s and 30s with osteoporosis. Like that's actually a real deal. Like when they're not cycling and they have low hormones, it can start at a young age. And then low estrogen usually comes in last. I feel like because many patients are estrogen dominant in their early years because of all the, endocrine disrupting estrogenic chemicals in the environment. But symptoms of low estrogen, that's when the hot flashes, night sweats, urinary incontinence, vaginal dryness, kind of memory fog sits in. So I would say, pending which hormones you are low in, because you're ultimately asking what are the tips for balancing your hormones, right? So pending what you're low in,
Yeah.
there are also, after you do the easy things I said, easy, kind of easy, reduce stress, fix nutritional deficiencies, detox the body. There are herbs, there are other supplements you can take to help boost hormones. Like for progesterone, taking Vitex was extremely helpful for me. So in my younger patient population, we use nutrients, we use herbs to help the functioning organs like the ovaries, right, or the thyroid or whatever, even testes in male, like produce more sex hormones. But there does come a point in time as we age where our ovaries, our glands kind of shrivel up and throw in the towel and they say, I'm done, right? So the herbs kind of quit working in those situations, especially if patients have had hysterectomies. So there is a time and place for hormone replacement therapy, and we can definitely get into that because I'm a huge fan of that.
Yeah, so with hormone replacement therapy, because I hear different things, I feel like things have also shifted and changed with research out there. I guess my first piece of this is okay, perimenopause. Can you explain what perimenopause is? Like, because again, it can be a
Yeah,
very long period of time for people. But then my
yeah.
question is with that is should women be, again, obviously working with a specialist, a doctor that understands hormones really, really well and understands hormone replacement therapy, should women actually be starting more of that hormone replacement therapy during perimenopause or waiting until once they're like into menopause?
Well,
Or
I say, why wait? I mean, so yes, I think they should start earlier. And usually, again, the first hormone to go is progesterone. So that's usually, we always try natural options first, but if those aren't enough to achieve optimal levels and symptom relief, then we move on to hormone replacement therapy. So yes, I think, I mean, research will show, even aside from progesterone, the earlier, I need to go back and define perimenopause. And let me finish this train of thought. The earlier that women are given estrogen replacement therapy, testosterone, right, progesterone, the earlier they're given those hormones, like we're talking within the first 5 years of menopause, the better the outcome from a longevity standpoint. We have a greater likelihood of preserving memory, bone density, and muscle mass, and reducing cardiovascular risk, whatnot. If we wait 10, 20 years, which I have patients who come to me in their 70s, 80s, and we initiate hormone replacement therapy and they feel better, but we've already lost bone mass, right? Their arteries are already stiffening. Like we need to intervene sooner for a better outcome. But going back to perimenopause, so perimenopause could be 1 year, it could be 10 years, right? It usually, I've seen it start happening in the 30s, can start happening in the 40s. It's that window before cessation of bleeding, right? So the average age of menopause is 52. So think of those 10 years, potentially 10 years. It may only be a few years, but the years preceding menopause, when hormone fluctuations start to happen that are a little more drastic, right? So hot flashes may start, night sweats, inability to sleep through the night, irregular cycles. They could be short, they could be long, your bleeding could be heavy, could be scant. Just kind of starting to notice you don't feel as well. A lot of women just don't feel comfortable in their body. They know something's shifting. I'm getting more weight around my middle. Like, what's going on? Right? Why is everything changing, even though I haven't changed anything with my lifestyle? That's kind of the perimenopause. That's window right before menopause hits. Does that answer your question?
yeah, it does. I just wanted to clarify for women listening so I think it gets kind of confusing out there in the world of information yeah, that's what I hear from women.
Well,
Is
if
it's
you
like,
go to your conventional doc, they're just going to say either your hormones are fine or you're in menopause. Do you want an antidepressant? Do you want a sleeping pill? Like, what do you want? Like, they don't recognize the transition and how we could support women so they're less symptomatic. So,
right, instead of just like you said, dealing with just putting a pill to a symptom. And I
mhm.
really think I want to reiterate too with hormones that like everything you said before, like the food, the stress, the detoxification. So I guess I want to ask you this. When it comes to helping to support hormones, I assume you're on the page of supporting hormones while making those changes.
Of course, then you'll
Yeah.
require less of the hormone. Yes.
Yeah. And then what about testing? Because I know when we start trying to find that balance of hormones, it's really important to test so we're not throwing things out of balance, more out of balance in another direction with hormones.
Testing is very important. So, how we decide to proceed with patients at our clinic is a combination of symptoms. So, we gather a thorough history, right? We get their labs, and then we combine symptoms with labs to determine our path moving forward. And last night we had an event at our clinic here in Hiawatha, and one of our other nurse practitioners was presenting, and she said, I love what she said. She explained estrogen as kind of being the Goldilocks hormone, meaning there's this fine window of where you want your estrogen, right? Too low estrogen, you have hot flashes. Too high estrogen, you have breast tenderness, breakthrough bleeding, weight gain, right? So it is really important to test your levels on labs after replacement therapy, right? I mean, upon initiation and after, to make sure that the dose your providers put you on is appropriate for you, right? That your levels aren't too low or aren't too high. So testing is extremely valuable. And that's also something that conventional medicine misses. I think many times, not many, sometimes patients go to their doctor and they aren't even given hormones. Sometimes they're given synthetic hormones, but everybody's kind of given the same dose, right? And then levels are never tested. So that's definitely a strength in what we do.
Okay, so you just
Yeah.
mentioned synthetic hormones. So can you talk about the difference between natural and
Yes.
synthetic and what you recommend?
So to be clear, I'm a fan of natural bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, which is life-changing. I am not a fan of synthetic hormones. And case in point, sorry, this is fresh of memory because we had this event last night. I had, another woman in the audience raise her hand and say, you're talking about all the benefits of natural progesterone, but when I was put on progesterone, I felt irritable and angry. And, she was kind of complaining of how her provider had treated her. And upon further questioning, I said, I don't think you were put on progesterone. I think you were put on synthetic progestins. And she was put on through the conversation. This is a great example in front of all the attendees last night. She was put on medroxyprogesterone acetate, 10 milligrams per day, which is a very high dose, and she felt like hell. And I hear this all the time from my patients, and that's why they're kind of scared of hormones. Either they've had a bad experience with birth control, or they hear hormones cause cancer or whatnot. I will say that all that is true with synthetic hormones, not with natural bioidentical. So it was encouraging for me to be able to share with her that what she took was not bioidentical. That was not natural. That was synthetic. And so the difference is synthetic hormones are man-made. They're made in a lab. And they don't fit like a key fitting in a keyhole. They don't fit. That hormone doesn't fit your hormone receptor appropriately, perfectly. It's going to bind partially, just like how plastics, other estrogen disrupting chemicals can bind partially to your hormone receptor. They try to park in that parking spot, but it just doesn't fit appropriately, which is harder for our body to detoxify from, and we are more likely to have side effects from. Natural bioidentical hormones usually come from a plant-based source like soy or yam, although there's many times the soy and yam is actually physically removed. So if you have an allergy to those, many times you can still take the hormone. That's another conversation. But essentially they're plant-based, but the end result is 100% bioidentical to what your body's already making, right? So your body sees that not as something foreign, but as, oh, that's what we used to make more of, but now we need some additional via supplementation. That hormone's going to bind into that hormone receptor perfectly because it's biologically identical to what you're already making. And I tell patients, back to the cancer kind of myth here, natural hormones do not cause cancer. If natural hormones cause cancer, we'd have a bunch of 20-year-olds, men and women, right, with high hormones running around with cancer. And then we'd have 90-year-olds with low hormone levels not getting cancer. And that's not the case, right? The young individuals aren't getting the cancer and the old individuals are. So natural hormones do not cause cancer. There is a disclaimer here, though. Natural hormones could still feed an existing cancer. So if a woman had an estrogen receptor positive breast cancer, I'm not going to give her estrogen because it could still feed that cancer. Be it not the cause, it could still feed that, if that makes sense. So it is still important to get breast screenings, whether you do thermography or ultrasounds, whatever you prefer. I think that's important when you consider hormone replacement therapy. But to make hormone replacement therapy effective, we want to look at the form, want to make sure it's bioidentical, and we want to look at the route of administration of that hormone too, to make sure that's the safest for the patient. So in my book, I literally show examples of molecular structures of back to that medroxyprogesterone acetate, the synthetic progestin versus a natural progesterone molecule, synthetic testosterone versus natural. So you can actually see they do have, they look different. And so our body recognizes what it's already been making throughout its life, the natural, much better than the synthetic. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, Stephanie. Okay, so what about women with hysterectomies? And again, whether they are already into menopause when they've had a hysterectomy, or women that were cycling and then have a hysterectomy.
So that can be a loaded question, just in that, like, okay, are we talking about a 35-year-old or a 75-year-old? Like if we're talking about an older woman, she may be okay. And she may have already been through the menopausal transition and not want hormone replacement therapy. I will say the younger the woman, the more likely she's going to need hormone replacement therapy at some point in her life. So, and it also depends on if the ovaries are removed, right? So if both of the ovaries are removed, all she has to produce sex hormones is her B team, her adrenals, which, coming back to stress, if you're stressed, the adrenals aren't going to help a lot. If you have no stress, you live on the beach, you have a great life, maybe your adrenals, your B team will help out a lot, but that's usually not the case. So the ovaries, once the uterus is removed, the blood supply to them is cut off. And the research shows ovaries last about 2 years. So, and I literally see this in my patients where they're like, I'm kind of getting by without hormone replacement therapy a couple years. And then suddenly they just crash. And so then the ovaries are done, right? And so those women, in order to, again, protect their heart and their brain and their bones. Yes, my strong belief is that the sooner we intervene and get them on hormones, the better they're going to be, like from a longevity standpoint.
Yeah, and it sounds too that what you're saying too is with women that um, have a hysterectomy but are able to keep their ovaries, it's really going to be important to really be testing to see how stuff is shifting because around that 2 year
Mhm.
mark, they may need a little bit more support. So,
It's super
yeah,
interesting because I have patients who are even providers and who are very interested in this sort of work. And so I've had a lot of patients get hormone labs done the week before hysterectomy and the week after hysterectomy, with and without ovaries removed. And it's just, I've seen data all across the board. Like I've seen some patients literally the week after their hysterectomy, they got nothing. Like they need replacement therapy now. And then I've also seen women last longer than 2 years. I've seen them last 5 years. They have a great lifestyle. Like they're doing great to preserve those ovaries. So back to your point on testing, that's where again, testing just validates, like it just becomes very valuable to know where patients are at.
yeah, and the other thing, I just wanted to make one more mention on the testing because when you were talking about back with our cancer conversation, this is why I love the Dutch test. And it may
Yes.
not be one you also want to do like blood labs as well. But I like the Dutch test because it shows how we're methylating our
Yes.
hormones. And I think that that is, we talked about the Dutch test on here, and it's, I just think it's so important for women to see that because it can give you that extra sense of like, yes, I'm methylating everything just fine. And so adding a little extra estrogen, for example, is going to be great for my body. Or no, I'm not methylating well, and we need to actually fix that
Fix that
first.
before we give you
Yeah,
estrogen. Yeah.
because then
No, the
that
only
can help
reason
to fix. Yeah,
the only reason I was in that example saying blood testing is it's just cheaper and easier, right? To do
yeah,
a Dutch test a week and, before and after hysterectomy is just
yeah,
more
yeah.
costly. So it's like in that situation, we were just trying to get some data, but I totally agree, especially if patients have had estrogen dominance. We need to see how the liver's detoxifying that estrogen, through those pathways. And so we can't assess that via blood. We have to do the Dutch test for that.
Yeah. But then doing more blood tests because, like you said, it is cheaper and easier. But it is. I always think it's very eye opening to see that. So okay, Stephanie, this is so good. So I kind of want to shift gears and talk about longevity, but
Yeah.
let's talk about hormones with longevity and kind of go that direction because why is it? So we've talked about all this, you've mentioned some of it, but when we're actually thinking about like quality of life and longevity,
Yeah.
why is keeping our hormones balanced, probably doing some bioidentical hormone replacement therapy as we are getting older, especially perimenopause, menopause, and so on.
So hormones, again, and I've mentioned this, but I'll dive a little deeper. So
Mhm.
hormones, well, let me go back. So this is kind of a chicken and an egg question, in that some people ask, like, does hormone decline lead to aging, or does
Oh,
aging lead to hormone decline? And I would say most providers like myself believe that it's the hormone decline that leads to aging. So hormones help preserve back to bone density, muscle mass, cardiovascular function, brain health, and they just help you feel good. They preserve relationships. And we know that community and relationships are also a
mhm.
predictor of longevity. So I will say I'll focus on estrogen as an example here. I use this with my patients a lot. Like when patients have vaginal dryness, they may have stiff arteries as well, right? So we don't always tie that menopausal change, which for some women may not be super problematic, to have vaginal dryness, to the fact that they also could have heart disease. It's the same thing with a man. If he has erectile dysfunction, by the time he has erectile dysfunction, he probably has very low testosterone and huge cardiovascular and diabetes risk. So you have, my point being, you have estrogen receptors all over your body, not just in your vagina, right? Estrogen even helps lubricate your eyes. There are times in my cycle I have drier eyes, right? When my estrogen's lower versus, times when it's higher. So estrogen helps with elasticity, not just of the vagina, but of the cardiovascular system. So again, if you're having vaginal dryness, you might be having some stiff arteries, right? Increasing cardiovascular risk. Testosterone helps your muscles, and your heart is a muscle. So obviously testosterone can help there. And then I will say, a lot of these statistics I don't have totally accurately memorized, but postmenopausally, the risk of heart disease goes up from something like in women from 1 to 7 to 1 in 4. So again, why is that? Probably in a huge part due to hormone decline. So if we can intervene sooner, we can reduce some of that risk. So hormones also kind of talk about cardiovascular risk there, but then
Yeah.
hormones also preserve muscle mass. They help maintain and build bones. I have never seen any drug in my career improve bone density, like build bones as much as hormones can. And specifically, and we can go here if you want. I mean, all hormones are helpful for bone density, but specifically testosterone pellets.
Yeah.
I have seen patients go from osteoporosis, very low T score, to over years, not overnight, but over years, totally normal bone density. And they go back to their doctor, and their doctor's like, what the heck are you doing? Then they share. I mean, hormones literally help build bone. You need to have strong bone density because when you think of the risk of falling, and fracture, right? When that happens, your risk of death greatly increases. And so we really do need to think about muscle mass and bone density and whatnot. And then who wants to be here on Earth at 95 if you don't have your memory, right? Like preserving memory is really important. And it's interesting, the risk of Alzheimer's is something like, again, I don't know these statistics, but something like 9 times higher in women postmenopausally.
Because
So
of our loss of hormones, likely. I mean, there can be at least that
literally,
correlation. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And obviously women have more estrogen than men, so we think there's a strong estrogen relationship there, that the decline is increasing Alzheimer risk. So hormones help with blood flow everywhere in the body. Like testosterone can help my patients with Raynaud's, right? When their fingers get cold, because it's helping with blood flow, and for men, it's helping with, well, and women too, but helping with blood flow to the genitalia, right? But it also helps with blood flow to the brain. So it helps with brain fog, just helps reduce memory issues. And then you were also kind of just asking, how do hormones just help quality of life? Well, they help aches and pains go away. So if you have fewer aches and pains, and you have better mood and motivation and energy, then you can work out, right? Which again comes back to strength and endurance and muscle mass and whatnot. So I just highlighted a couple things there, but hormones are they're extremely important as we age, not to mention reducing risk of diabetes and all kinds of other things. But those are the main take homes,
No,
I'd say.
I love this. It's so good. I always say, that's why I get so passionate about movement and mobility in particular, is because I mean, I've worked with people of all ages and men, not just women. And when mobility starts to decline, health starts to decline. So again, kind of like you're saying, it's a chicken and egg thing. Like we need to keep our movement and our mobility, but if we're having such a hard time moving and mobility, a lot of what you're talking about could be so beneficial to helping you to also stay more mobile and stronger and all of that,
Totally.
which is why I love these conversations, because this is the thing, it's never just one thing, right? I'm like the movement person. I love movement. I'm also the person that say like it needs to be gentle or the right type of movement for your
Yeah,
body,
yes,
right?
yes.
And where you are and what stage of life, and are you, rehabbing your body from an injury or something, and we want to work to build your body back up. But I also think it's so important to understand hormones really, really matter.
Mm-hmm.
And what are the things that we can do? And then it's, finding the right person to work with. And Stephanie, you're local here. So those of you that are local, Stephanie, you're amazing.
Back to emphasize the movement part, like we can optimize the hormones, but the patients still have to do the work, right? They still have to exercise to
Yeah.
get the muscle mass and whatnot. So it's not just that. I mean, I don't want to say hormones aren't life-changing. They are life-changing, but patients still have to do the work, right? They still have to exercise.
So let me ask you this question, because I always love bringing movement in here as much as we can, is do you see, like, from a longevity perspective of like how much, is there a point at which like too much working out is actually detrimental to longevity?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So you never want to over exercise. So back to kind of how we opened the podcast, I was saying stress is your body's biggest hormone hijacker. Well, exercise can be stress. So how do you know if you're over exercising, if you're overdoing it? There are a couple different ways to analyze that. One is your cortisol so jacked up? Like if you're exercising 2-3 hours a day during cardio, that is probably too much, right? If
Yes.
you can't fall
Yes, it
asleep at
is.
night because you're just jacked up, that is probably too much. If your recovery is poor, right? If some people can work out 5 days a week, a lot of people can't. If it takes you 2-3 days to recover, you shouldn't be doing cardio or whatever, hitting the weights too hard or whatever, right? Every day. You need to allow your body to be able to recover from that. If you need a nap, if you're falling asleep after exercising, like that's too much. So I see this a lot. I see patients over exercising, which tanks out their hormones because their cortisol's jacked up and their sex hormones are actually low. So there is a fine balance. And I think that's different based on everyone's kind of physical fitness and age and stress. And but yes, there definitely does come a point where overexercising is a big thing.
That's why I love Pilates and everything that I teach because I feel like it's super gentle but so effective for strengthening your body and so amazing for mobility and decreasing stress. It kind of checks all the boxes.
Yeah.
I suppose could you overdo it if you're doing it like a couple hours a day, maybe? But like
I mean,
most
if your
people aren't
muscles
going to
are
do
super
that.
sore, like if they're in a high level
Yeah.
and their muscles are super sore, maybe they're overdoing it. But I think, yeah,
It's
Pilates is a good
usually like
balance.
the
Yeah.
higher intensity stuff, or like you said, doing longer cardio. I mean, I've had this conversation so often because I used to be a classic over exerciser in my early 20s and tanked my cortisol, just like destroyed my cortisol. And I feel like I preach this a lot, but I love having this conversation when we think of longevity because it's like, yeah, we want to keep moving, but just like everything, there's a point at which like something that's supposed to be good for you is good
Mhm.
for you as long as it's not overdoing it. And movement
Yeah.
is one of those. So doing the right types of movement for your body, obviously we want you to be strong. Building
Mhm.
that muscle mass is really important, but making sure you're not overdoing it and working into it. So
You can overdo anything. I mean, anything could be a cure or a poison, like water. In high school,
yeah.
my husband's twin brother was challenged to like drink, I don't know what it was, like several liters of water driving back from a concert. Well, he ended up in the emergency room. He passed out, right? Because he depleted his
Oh
sodium because he
no.
literally poisoned his body with too much water. He's fine now. Everything's fine. But, learned a hard lesson. So we need water. We need not too much water. We need exercise and movement, but not too much. So, like with everything in life, there's that balance.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what is your position, Stephanie, on protein specifically for women, and from a longevity perspective?
Well, I will say muscle is the organ of longevity. So you have to work your muscles and you need protein to build muscles. You also need testosterone to build muscles. Back to why I was, kind of tooting my horn on how important testosterone is. And even back to like we're talking about cardio and over exercising. Like um when you see like marathon runners, they're usually pretty skinny and they don't have a lot of muscle on their body, right? And I'm not I'm not making fun of marathon runners, but I know some of them that have dropped out of heart attacks at really early ages also, right? That their heart's just done. So I think I'm not a fan of just doing, long-term endurance running. I think weightlifting is extremely important back to longevity. Now, any exercise is better than nothing. So like walking, if that's all you can do, walk, right? But if you can weightlift and get a good balance of different types of movement, I think that's even better. So back to protein. Protein. I think protein is really important. I think sometimes it's hard to get enough from food. Sorry, I was looking for my notes.
Oh, you're fine.
um, I think I'm a fan of animal protein. So I know some individuals are big on plant protein, but I just do not believe and I don't know your opinion on this, but I don't think plant protein is complete protein. So we literally use 300 grams of amino acids, aka protein, right, per day. So our ability to break down protein is required for detox, which we've talked about today, and weight loss. And 60% of the protein, right, of the amino acids we consume is only used just for liver and gut enzymes, like just to function on a daily basis, let alone building muscle. Okay, so we need to consume a lot of amino acids, a lot of protein on a daily basis. So I think you're asking how much protein does an average woman need? Well, it depends on what their goal is, but a lot of my patients' goals include weight loss. So many times I'm recommending to many of them a gram of protein per pound of body weight. So if they're 150 milligrams, woman, I'm saying you need 150 grams of protein, which I'm going to be honest, it's hard to get from food. I
Yes,
don't know
it
your
is.
thought on supplementation, but I'll just give you my opinion because you're asking.
Yeah, I'd
I
love
am
to
a big
hear.
fan. I'm a big fan of perfect aminos. I could show you them. They're over here. Have you heard of the perfect amino supplement? So
I know of different ones, and I've got like my
there are
branched chain
different
amino
ones.
acids, and there's so many
Yeah.
things out there. Yeah.
So again, if your body requires like 300 grams per day, you better be getting you better be getting a lot because
Yes.
you want your body in the state of repair, not breakdown. So if you're not getting in it as much as you require, you're not going to be able to build muscle. So, okay, so for a 150-pound woman, if she needs 150 grams of amino acids, let's say she can't get that from food. Let's say she gets 100, which is still a lot to get
Hmm.
100 grams of
It is.
protein from food. Then she'd have 50-gram difference to make up with supplements. So hear me out on the perfect amino supplement thing here. So let's just say that the supplement comes at a ratio of like 1 to 3 from like supplement to food protein. It's hard to explain, but rather than go with the 50 grams that someone has to make up, let's just turn that into 45 for sake of math here. So the perfect amino supplement, if you take 5 grams of that, that's equivalent to 10 grams of protein from eggs, 15 grams from meat, or 29 or 30 grams from food or from a protein powder. I'm sorry. So
Okay.
5 grams of the perfect amino, either in a powder or in the capsules, is equivalent to 29-gram protein powder. But there's a difference here with the perfect aminos. Those are, and I don't work for the company, we just sell them. I like them. They're 99% utilized by the body with no waste. So within 24 minutes, regardless of gut health, gut inflammation, those amino acids are getting absorbed into the body that your body can then triage and use wherever needed to build muscle or detox or whatnot without the waste. When you eat a steak, some of that is wasted. So you're
Hmm.
not, you're only really getting about a third of that, if that makes sense. So you could make up that extra 50 grams or 45 grams from a supplement standpoint with perfect aminos. Does that make sense?
It
So
does.
that's
Yeah, no,
kind of with
I
my
yeah.
patients. I try to just try to break down how much are you getting from food. If this is how much you need, then this is how much we need to supplement with. So that's a more complex answer, but you want to be net positive, like you want to to build muscle.
Yeah,
So
you need the protein. And I mean, I'm with you on animal protein. I've yet to work with a client on the health side and have them do plant-based. I mean, do a little plant-based if that's fine if you want. Um, I don't see that it helps people heal. I don't see that it really makes you that strong and healthy. And like you said, detoxification and all that. I'm not saying I know of people out there that swear, like their health turned around when they went vegan or
vegan, yeah,
vegetarian
yeah.
and stuff like that. And I just I don't see it. Like I said, I've worked with a lot of people over the years.
I think those are
Whether it was,
anomalies. There's always a
yeah.
person, and maybe based on their genetics or whatnot, that is a good fit for them. But
Mhm.
everybody's different, and I think the majority of the time we need plants, like we need fiber and antioxidants and nutrients
Mhm.
from plants. And you can take a plant-based protein powder if you really want. But I think animal protein is more complete and it's better, like you're saying, for recovery and wound healing and whatnot.
Absolutely. So important. So, ladies, eat that animal protein every single meal. Start working to increase it slowly. Don't double it overnight. That your body, your digestive system would not be happy about that. But slowly work into that. Speaking of like kind of the animal protein, do you put a lot of clients on like HCL and stuff to help break it down? To
Yeah, I mean,
try
so
you, especially if you're eating like, more red meats, things like that. Not for the supplements, you guys, just for food.
yeah. So what you're getting at is hydrochloric acid is required, right, to break down, digest, and absorb protein, just like how you need
Yep.
ox bile, to digest and absorb fats, and you need enzymes for carbs and whatnot. So I don't just across the board put everybody on it because I don't think everybody needs it. But when patients come to see us, just like how we're, doing a hormone evaluation, I'm also assessing their GI system. They have a huge questionnaire they fill out just to become a patient. And so if they're having bloating, fatigue after meals, like if they're having symptoms that suggest they're not digesting food well, then we're going to work them up for that. I mean, maybe they need to change their diet. Maybe we need to do a stool test, which can show me if they need hydrochloric acid, or maybe we'll just trial them on it. And if it helps, yes, great. So, yeah, there's a time and place for that, but I don't across the board just put everybody on it.
Good to know. Okay, Stephanie, this has been so great. Is there anything else around longevity or hormones that we haven't talked about that you'd really like to make sure you share with everybody listening?
I think we hit the main points just as far as hormones can be replaced safely and effectively. But I would caution you, like, make sure you find a provider who knows what they're doing, right? If you need to have brain surgery, you're going to go to a brain surgeon. Like, you're not just going to go to your family doctor, right? So if you want to really work to optimize your hormones, whether you want to do that naturally without replacement therapy or with replacement therapy, go to a specialist, go to someone who's truly been trained in this. So what they're giving you is appropriate, and that they're checking things like running the Dutch test to make sure these hormones are being safely eliminated from your body. I think that's just an important take home.
Yeah, and using natural hormones instead of synthetic sounds like the key here
If your
with
hormone
hormone
on your
replacement
prescription, it
therapy.
doesn't say testosterone, progesterone, or estradiol, it is not testosterone, progesterone, or estradiol. If it says medroxyprogesterone acetate or levonorgestrel or Premarin or whatever, like, those are not bioidentical hormones. So
Yeah,
yes, take the
so great.
natural.
Thank you for sharing that with everyone. Okay, Stephanie, will you share with everyone where they can learn more about everything that you're doing? Obviously, if they're local and want to, drive in to meet with you, or if they are not local, but they can get access to your longevity blueprint book and everything that you have online available.
Yeah, so sure. So our clinic is the Integrative Health and Hormone Clinic. Again, we're in Hiawatha, basically Cedar Rapids, Iowa, a couple hours from you. That website is ihhclinic.com. So you can check us out there. You mentioned I also have a podcast called Your Longevity Blueprint. That's found on all podcast platforms. And we have a separate website, Your Longevity Blueprint. So check that out, and your episode will launch shortly here. Well, before this one probably launches. um, and then I do have a free gift. We talked a little bit about stress today. So I do have a free ebook, which is a step-by-step guide to what stress is and how to minimize its impact on your body and your hormones. So you can find that at yourlongevityblueprint.com/creating-resilience. So I certainly check that out.
I'll put it in the show notes. So you guys don't worry about it. Just look below. We'll put the link there for you guys to be able to find it.
And then I've been trying to get my listeners on the podcast and our, local patients to connect. So we recently started a new Facebook group. It's just called Your Longevity Blueprint. It's free to join. So check out my podcast, check out our clinic, our Facebook group, and get your free gift. And yeah, if we can help, we'd love to.
Awesome. Well, thank you so
Oh,
much,
and
Stephanie.
Instagram. I always forget. So many things to mention. And follow me on Instagram, Stephanie Gray, DNP. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. This has been such great information. So, for all of you listening, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Dr. Stephanie. You can always reach out to me. Find me on Instagram at ericazeal.com. Again, always you can reply to emails. And of course, I know Stephanie, so I can always forward emails or messages, questions to her as well. And of course, if we get lots of questions, we'll get you back on for sure to answer more questions. Hormones are so many things we can talk about with hormones, but this has been so great today. So thank you again so much, Stephanie. And again, for any of you, for those of you listening, be sure to share today's episode with other women in your lives, because I think this information really can be life-changing. I know I say that a lot, but it really can. Sometimes the littlest piece of information, even if it was like one little piece of information in this entire episode that was like a light bulb moment for someone, and is literally like, oh my gosh, that's the piece I've been missing, or that's the piece I need to do, or that piece of information that she didn't know. So thank you all so much for listening. Share this episode with all those women in your life, and I cannot wait to see you all back next week.